Have you ever wondered how engineering projects executed by teams scattered across different continents manage to seamlessly integrate their digital assets without constant contractual conflict? The answer lies in the structural framework of international standardization. Welcome to Module 2 of the BIM Information Management and ISO 19650 Masterclass, where we dive into Lesson 2.1. Architecture of ISO 19650, PAS 1192 to ISO Parts 1.6 and the UK BIM framework. In this session, designed specifically for technical professionals eager to master global data workflows, we will explore how this standard came to be and how its various modular parts fit together into a cohesive ecosystem. Over the next few minutes, we will unpack the DNA of this international benchmark, shifting your understanding from simple local definitions to a robust, globally aligned information management matrix. Let's begin by examining a critical paradox: how a global standard can still lead to localized project failures if implemented incorrectly. Imagine an international joint venture that configures its entire model naming convention to a textbook specification, only to have their entire project delivery rejected by a local municipality on the day of submission. This is the painful reality of global standards meeting local failures. While ISO 19650 is universally recognized as the premier global benchmark for information management, its practical execution relies heavily on specific localized national rules. A highly frequent compliance failure occurs when an engineering team perfectly follows the high-level global clauses, but fails to adapt to the local naming, classification, and codification systems required by the client's country. The commercial consequence of this error is severe. Applying the wrong national annex results in beautiful, compliant-looking work that completely fails local database acceptance, which ultimately delays handover and ties up capital. To navigate this structural challenge safely, we must follow a clear learning roadmap. Let's review our learning objectives for this session. To build a systematic understanding of this structural architecture, let's look closely at our primary learning objectives. First, our goal is to explain the comprehensive history and evolution of these standards, tracing the developmental path from the legacy British standards BS 1192 and publicly available specifications PAS 1192 straight to the modern ISO 19650 series. Second, we will map out the scope and real-time status of each of the 6 modular parts, moving from core concepts to specialist overlays. Third, we will define the functional positions of the UK BIM framework, regional national annexes, and relevant supporting standards. Fourth, we will learn how to read a standard correctly by decoding verbal imperatives like shall, should, and may, allowing you to select an optimal reading sequence tailored specifically to your project role. Finally, we will prepare you for the upcoming 2026 to 2027 international revisions, so your organization is never caught off guard by shifts in industry terminology. Let's look into the historical timeline to see where this standard originated. When you are implementing a sophisticated technical framework under a modern contract, it helps immensely to understand that these guidelines did not appear overnight. The modern global benchmark grew directly out of more than a decade of intensive real-world practice in the United Kingdom, specifically leveraging the BS 1192 and PAS 1192 series, which were originally known as BIM Level 2. Think of the historic PAS 1192 documents as a regional prototype, while the modern ISO 19650 represents the fully internationalized production version. During the generalization process managed by the International Technical Committee, ISO/T-C59/SC13, all UK-specific legal assumptions and insular local terminology were systematically stripped out. This optimization ensures that the core standard functions perfectly under any legal system, within any engineering sector, and in any country across the globe. Today, meeting these requirements is no longer an optional badge of excellence. It is increasingly a baseline global condition of professional appointment. Let's analyze how the framework structures this global mandate into modular parts. To manage complex information flows across a diverse supply chain, The international standard avoids a rigid, one-size-fits-all document and instead implements a highly flexible modular architecture. Let's take a comprehensive look at the 6 parts at a glance. The entire structural pyramid is underpinned by Part 1, which establishes the core concepts and principles that apply across the entire asset lifecycle. Branching directly from this foundation are the 2 primary process drivers: Part 2, which governs the delivery phase of assets, and Part 3, which controls the long-term operational phase. Sitting horizontally across these core processes are 3 cross-cutting specialist overlays: Part 4, which ensures information exchange quality; Part 5, which applies a security-minded approach; and Part 6, which mandates health and safety data management. This modular approach allows project teams to combine specific parts dynamically as the project demand requires. Let's examine the explicit purpose of each part in detail. Let's look at this reference matrix that outlines the exact focus and one-line purpose of each component within the standard series. Part 1, focusing on concepts and principles, serves as the ultimate vocabulary and foundation for the entire series. Part 2 covers the delivery phase, providing the rules for managing data while a built asset is actively being designed and constructed. Part 3 addresses the operational phase, directing how to protect and maintain asset information models once the physical building or infrastructure is handed over and actively in use by an operator. Moving down, Part 4 isolates information exchange, establishing the strict quality criteria and automated validation rules that every transaction must pass. Part 5 addresses the security-minded approach, outlining the precise security protocols required to handle sensitive data safely without exposing critical assets to cyber or physical threats. Finally, Part 6 targets health and safety information, mandating how teams must systematically share risk data to protect human lives across the asset lifecycle. Let's examine the timeline of how these standards were officially published. When you are auditing a project team for technical compliance, you must ensure your training materials match the up-to-date timeline of international publication. Let's trace the historical timeline from left to right to map out the current status. The journey began in 2018 with the simultaneous release of Parts 1 and 2, establishing the core delivery engine. In 2020, the standard expanded significantly as Parts 3 and 5 were officially published, capturing operations and security. Part 4 followed in 2022, introducing formal information exchange quality criteria. The final piece of the core framework arrived in 2025 with the formal publication of Part 6. You must note this critical status gate, ISO19650 0-6. 2025 is an active, fully published international standard, not a draft. If your legacy corporate training materials or contracts still label Part 6 as in development, you must update them immediately to reflect this active reality. Let's examine how this global timeline is localized within individual countries using national annexes. How can a single international standard remain perfectly relevant in both a hyper-dense metropolitan city and a rural highway project spanning completely different legal jurisdictions? It achieves this flexibility through the mechanism of national annexes. By design, a global ISO standard cannot legislate national contract law, regional building codes, or highly localized domestic regulations. Therefore, the core standard defines the global process clauses, while regional national annexes explicitly define the local asset classification tables and the precise alphanumeric coding for information container naming conventions. Interestingly, due to its maturity, many countries formally or informally adopt the UK National Annex as their domestic default. As an absolute rule of thumb, you must confirm exactly which national annex governs your appointment before you spend any effort configuring your naming conventions and database schemas. Let's clarify the difference between these binding rules and advisory framework guidance. Let's talk about one of the most common sources of legal disputes and coordination confusion on modern engineering projects: the dangerous habit of blending binding rules with friendly advisory guidance. To maintain a clean compliance record, you must keep these 2 pillars completely distinct. On the left side, we have the standard. The standard represents the contractually binding framework that dictates the absolute, unalterable rules. A formal requirement explicitly written in the core standard will always completely override any conflicting guidance material. On the right side, we have the guidance, issued by bodies like the UKBIM framework. This resource is purely advisory and explanatory. It provides helpful templates, process maps, and practical resources to assist you in applying the rules, but it never alters the legal meaning of the standard itself, treating helpful guidance as if it were a mandatory law, or conversely ignoring a strict standard requirement because a piece of guidance softened the explanation, is a textbook path to a project dispute. To separate these rules mechanically, let's learn how to read the standard's precise legal verbs. If you try to read an international ISO standard like a casual engineering textbook, you will quickly completely misinterpret your contract obligations. You must master the precise legal definitions assigned to 4 core terminology keywords. Let's decode this standard verbal hierarchy. First, the word shall indicates a strict mandatory requirement. You must meet every single shall clause completely to claim official conformance with the standard. Second, the word should indicates a strong recommendation. This means the action is fully expected by the market unless your team has a documented, highly sound engineering reason to deviate. Third, the word may indicates something permitted but entirely optional, giving you a clear path for flexible execution. Fourth, a note serves as purely explanatory text designed to build conceptual understanding, but it carries absolutely zero contractual requirements. Here is a professional tip. Always read the definitions section of your contract documents first. Most project disagreements dissolve the moment everyone uses defined terms correctly. Let's see how these verbs connect to the wider family of international standards. To achieve flawless digital delivery, you must recognize that ISO19650 does not operate in total isolation. It functions as the central command engine of a much wider standards family. Let's map out the 3 primary satellite systems that surround our core process engine. To our left, we find classification systems, such as Uniclass. Classification provides a highly consistent, machine-readable method to group, sort, and tag information assets uniformly across an entire facility. To our right, we find the OpenBIM and IFC data schema. IFC serves as a neutral, application-independent data structure that allows information models to travel between completely different commercial software applications without any data loss. Positioned directly above is ISO7817-1:2024, which provides the precise methodology for defining the level of information need. This standard ensures you specify just enough geometric and alphanumeric data to fulfill a specific business purpose, completely eliminating waste. Let's determine the MO. When you are faced with thousands of pages of technical standard text, trying to read everything sequentially from cover to cover will lead to immediate information overload. Instead, you must deploy a sensible reading order tailored strictly to your professional role. There is one absolute baseline rule for everyone. Every single professional, regardless of their position, must start by reading Part 1 to master the core concepts and principles. Image illustrating tailored reading paths. Delivery teams route to Part 2 and 4, owners route to Part 3, and information managers encompass all parts. Once that foundation is locked in, your path branches dynamically. If you operate on the delivery side as a design manager, main contractor, or project manager, you should route directly to Part 2 to manage delivery processes, and then advance to Part 4 to master exchange quality gates. If you are an owner, corporate operator, or facility manager, you can bypass the noisy delivery details and focus heavily on Part 3 alongside Part 1 to manage operational databases. Finally, dedicated information managers must master the complete suite by diving deeply into Parts 2, 3, and 4 simultaneously. If you are managing a sensitive or high-risk asset, you must add the specialist overlays of Parts 5 and 6 early in the timeline, never as an afterthought. Let's peer into the future to see what is changing in the upcoming revisions. As a forward-thinking professional, you must always ensure your strategic planning accounts for upcoming changes in the international landscape. A major international revision of Parts 1, 2, and 3 is currently actively underway, with formal publication expected around 2027. I want to emphasize a reassuring principle immediately. This update represents an evolution, absolutely not a total reinvention. The core management discipline and data structures remain completely stable. Let's look at the three key shifts driving this update. First, there is a much stronger emphasis on the broad discipline of information management over the commercialized brand label of BIM. Second, we are seeing a tighter integration of the delivery and operational phases, which means Parts 2 and 3 may eventually merge into a singular lifecycle pathway. Third, several familiar documents are being restyled. For example, the historic BIM execution plan may be recaptioned around information production. Your mandate is clear. Master the current published standards today because they govern active contracts right now, and the underlying concepts will carry forward seamlessly. Let's see how these parts look in action during a live delivery phase. To visualize how these separate parts integrate into a single operational workflow, let's trace a practical, real-world example, a regional council hospital project. During the intense delivery phase of this complex healthcare asset, three distinct parts of our standard must run in perfect synchronization. First, Part 1 concepts are deployed from day one of the procurement cycle to enforce a perfectly uniform shared vocabulary across the entire multidisciplinary supply chain, ensuring a common understanding. Next, Part 2 clauses dictate the day-to-day project management processes as the physical hospital building is designed, coordinated, and built on site. Finally, Part 4 steps in at every major design phase gate and construction milestone, providing the strict validation and exchange quality criteria that every information model must satisfy before the client accepts the container. Let's see how the workflow shifts as the hospital project reaches completion and transitions into operations. The moment our council hospital project passes its physical construction gates, the information management strategy undergoes a tactical shift. At the definitive handover milestone, Part 3 takes full control of the data lifecycle, driving the steady state of maintenance and keeping the asset information model highly accurate across decades of live operational use. Concurrently, our two specialist overlays must be actively maintained. Because a hospital represents a highly sensitive critical infrastructure asset, Part 5 security protocols are applied across all phases to mandate secure data handling and prevent unauthorized digital access to floor plans or plant areas. At the same time, Part 6 clauses govern the lifecycle management of all critical health and safety data, ensuring that risk information is instantly available to protect workers during any future maintenance or refurbishment. The ultimate synthesis insight here is clear. No single part delivers a project in isolation. True business value is unlocked only by the combination of the parts. Let's examine how this international terminology maps directly to historic local terms. If your project team is transitioning from legacy national frameworks to modern ISO19650 protocols, you will inevitably encounter some initial terminology confusion. To clear this up instantly, let's walk through our first vocabulary crosswalk, focusing on roles and requirements. Under the historic British PAS 1192 Level 2 framework, the primary client requirement document was known as the Employer's Information Requirements. Under ISO 19650, this has been updated to the Exchange Information Requirements, or EIR. While the functional acronym survived completely intact, the underlying definition has broadened significantly to encompass any appointing party across any tier of the supply chain. Similarly, the legacy term employer has been generalized to the relative role of the appointing party per appointment. Furthermore, the broad generic term supplier has been strategically split into lead appointed party and appointed party to clearly show who directly leads and coordinates the delivery team. Let's check our second crosswalk mapping plans and models. Let's continue our linguistic alignment by looking at our second vocabulary crosswalk, which addresses project plans and digital models. Candidates are often relieved to find out that several high-value acronyms survived the international translation completely unchanged. First, the term BIM Execution Plan, or BEP, has been retained with its core definition intact. It still represents the contractor's explicit technical response to the client's requirements, splitting into pre-appointment and confirmed versions. Second, the structural delivery plans known as the Master Information Delivery Plan, or MIDP, and the Task Information Delivery Plan, or TIDP, have been retained essentially unchanged. Third, the foundational terms for our digital twins, the Project Information Model, or PIM, and the Asset Information Model, or AIM, are preserved. This structural continuity ensures that your hard-earned technical modeling workflows remain highly relevant under the new international framework. Let's look at one major framework concept that has been completely retired. Let's talk about a major industry concept that you must completely strip out of your active contracts and marketing materials: the historic staircase of BIM levels. In previous decades, regional practice tracked organizational maturity via a strict staircase model flowing from level 0 through level 1 up to the collaborative level 2 to establish a true international standard. ISO19650 has officially internationalized, updated, and completely superseded the historic level 2 methodology. Moving forward, you must treat those old BIM levels purely as historical context, useful only when you are reading legacy project archives or old academic papers. In today's professional standard market, tracking arbitrary levels doesn't matter. The only true measure of compliance is verifiable conformance to the relevant parts of the ISO 19650 series. Let's look at the primary myths we need to drop to make this process work. To ensure your leadership team builds a highly accurate data strategy, let's explicitly run through 4 common industry misconceptions that you need to drop immediately. Myth number 1 claims that ISO 19650 is a brand new, untested framework. The reality is that it is backed by more than a decade of proven, intensive PAS 1192 field practice. Myth number 2 states that Part 6 is still just an unscored draft document. The reality is absolute. It was fully published as an active standard, ISO 19650-6:2025. Myth number 3 assumes that the advisory UKBIM framework guidance documents are completely mandatory. In reality, only the standard's core shall clauses are mandatory. The guidance simply advises on execution. Finally, myth number 4 argues that the standard dictates exactly which commercial software products your company must buy. The reality is that it strictly specifies neutral processes and information structures, never a commercial software product. Let's solidify our understanding by reviewing our 5 key takeaways. We have reached the conclusion of our foundational architectural session. Let's do a fast review of the 5 key takeaways you must lock in. First, ISO 19650 is the internationalized successor to the UKBS/PAS 1192 series and now stands as the definitive global benchmark for information management. Second, the standard features a highly modular structure of 6 parts that can be combined dynamically as the project demands. Third, Part 6, covering health and safety, is an active, fully published standard as of 2025. Fourth, national annexes are vital because they localize the global standard to fit domestic classification and naming conventions, while advisory guidance explains the process without overriding the rules. Finally, fifth, always read the word shall as a strict, mandatory project requirement and actively prepare your teams for the upcoming 2026 to 2027 lifecycle revisions. Let's execute our quick knowledge check to validate these takeaways. Let's close this intensive architectural session by running through 3 rapid-fire knowledge check questions to validate your understanding. Question 1. What is ISO 19650? The answer is straightforward. It is the internationalized successor to the historic UKBS 1192 and PAS 1192 standard series. Question 2. What is the current status of Part 6, focusing on health and safety information? The answer is absolute. It was fully published as an active standard, ISO 19650-6:2025, meaning it is no longer a draft and must be treated as active on all new projects. Question 3. When reading any part of the standard document, what does the specific word shall indicate? The answer is clear. It indicates a strict mandatory requirement that your project team must meet completely to claim formal conformance with the standard. This completes our lesson on the architecture of ISO 19650. Keep these modular parts aligned, read your verbs precisely, and I will see you in our next session.